Good afternoon. Today we are gathered once again to speak on the issue of sexual abuse within the church, or the sin of the abuse in the church, and how we face it and how we deal with it. Before beginning this presentation, I'd like to first clearly and emphatically state a few things. First, I'm not here to defend the institution or any particular person. I'm not here to apologize for the criminal or sinful actions of any brother priest, bishop, deacon, religious, or others who have ministered in the church. And I'm not here to point a finger to blame them. I'm here simply to present some facts and to share my experience in regards to the hurt, the anger, and the shame that I too feel as a member of the family of God, as a faithful servant of the church trying to bring Christ into the lives of others. And to have all of us pray together for this situation. Just as a word to everyone here, there will be two opportunities for you to ask questions here and those who are watching us live streaming. Halfway through, I'll pause for questions, and then again at the end, I'll do the same thing. Allow me to continue. I'm going to introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Father Larry Duncklee. I've been the pastor here at St. John the Evangelist in Riverhead for the past 7 years. I was ordained a priest May of 1980. I was also certified by the National Association of Catholic Chaplains as a hospital chaplain before I was ordained. I've served in several parishes, also as a chaplain at Matthew Memorial and St. Charles Hospitals for 6.5 years. I myself have never abused anyone, unless some of you feel that my homily might be too abusive sometimes. Nor have I ever committed a crime, except for a speeding ticket. And most important, most relevant, is that in all the places I've been in, I have never lived or served with a brother priest, deacon, bishop, or any staff member or volunteer who abused anyone. Some of the most painful moments of my priesthood was when I trusted, or when I was trusted enough by a few abused persons who came to tell me their story. All except one was way after the statute of limitations, and they were really cries for help, a cry for one to listen, not to judge them, but to validate their story and help them on the path to healing. A few times, the abused person only wanted to have the abuser admit out loud to them what they did and why they did it to them. Some of them turned to alcohol or some other destructive behavior to cope with the whole tragic chain of those events. I think, hope, and pray that any brother, priest, or deacon who listen, priest or bishop, who listen to one of these abused victims tell their story, either a conversation or confession, would be so crushed that they'd never be able to turn a blind eye away from the truth and would find it impossible, even sinful, to cover up an abuse case. So let us take a look at the recent history of sexual abuse in the church. And by recent, I really mean from my priesthood, the past 38 years. Two priests, Reverend Gilbert Goth, horrific crimes against possibly hundreds of children in the Diocese of Lafayette, set off a wave of scandal in 1985. And again, Father James Porter in Fall River, Massachusetts, who was arrested in 1990 in a very similar fashion, having allegedly abused hundreds of children. That's when we first really heard about this in a wide scale and knew that there was a major problem. Up until that time and until 1992, the church, most educational systems, organizations like the Boy Scouts and other organizations were all operating under the commonly held belief of the time, told them by the medical and counseling professions, that treatment and counseling would help cure these men. I'm not defending anybody here. However, everybody was doing what they felt was correct, supported by sound medical advice of the time. The instances were more widespread than we came to know later on. They were kept under wraps by everyone who knew about it: the church, lawyers, civil authorities, even many of the families of the abused, as well as the abused victim themselves. And there's many reasons why they hid that. The church was widely criticized when it was discovered that some bishops knew about some of the alleged crimes committed, but reassigned the priest instead of seeking to have them permanently removed from the priesthood. In defense of this practice, some have pointed out that public school administrators engage in a similar manner when dealing with accused teachers, as did the Boy Scouts of America and other organizations. In response to these allegations, defenders of the church actions have suggested that in reassigning priests after treatment, bishops were acting on the best medical advice, a policy also followed by the U.S. public school system when dealing with accused teachers. Some bishops and psychiatrists have asserted that the prevailing psychology of the time suggested that people could be cured through counseling. Many of the abusive priests had received counseling before being reassigned. They were allowed to resume their previous duties with children only when the bishop was advised by the treating psychologist or psychiatrist that it was safe for them to resume their duties. One of the problems, though, was that when they were reassigned, many of the people in that parish, many of the staff, even the pastors sometimes, did not know of the previous abuse cases, so they were not looking for it. From a legal perspective, the most serious criticism, aside from the incidents of child sexual abuse themselves, was the failure to report accusations to the police. In response to a failure to report abuse, lawmakers have changed the law, making reporting of abuse to police compulsory, because it was always a crime. For example, in 2002, Massachusetts passed a law requiring religious officials to report the abuse of children, and others have followed suit. It is in 1992 that things began to change, and everyone came to know that this was not curable and that it was a horrendous crime and action. At that point, the dioceses around the country should all have been reporting cases to authorities, since it was a crime. Only in 2002, when the Boston Globe opened up the eyes of the world to systematic cover-up, did things really change. At that point, the U.S. bishops developed the charter, which say anyone who had a credible accusation against them had to be removed from ministry. It had to be reported to civil authorities. At the same time, they developed one of the most extensive and highly reputable systems for prevention of abuse by a rigorous screening system. That system is administered by an outside agency that we pay for and that pretty much all the dioceses pay for. The diocese does not administer it or do the screening. No one can work, volunteer, or minister in the church without this screening. In addition to the screening, everyone is also required to attend training. This training helps people to spot signs of abuse and also to help set up systems and procedures and guidelines so as not to allow abuse to happen. At this point, I'll stop if anyone has any questions.
I just have one statement.
Sure.
I know this issue of the statute of limitations, and I think that's a major part of the problem because whatever it is. Right?
Okay, the person here says that the statute of limitations is a problem because it allows it to continue and to be covered up. Yes and no, because not about this issue, but if you allow a window of opportunity for a particular offense, you then begin to encroach that in all the part of the legal system. You also would not have the ability or the court system or the judges to hear all those cases and deal with it. You also have time, which clouds memories and facts, and you also have many people who are dead. On top of that, it's not a fair system because the law allows no cap whatsoever on civil suits brought against the church. However, in the educational system, it's only $50,000 is the cap. So if it was to be fair across the board, I would support it. But if it's not fair across the board, I would not. Yes, and that's the, Linda, that's the case that's always presented. But again, when these cases come forth 20, 21 years later, you cannot look and judge that with the system we have set up now. But I understand what you're saying. Many people say that. Any questions from the viewers? No question from the viewers. Okay, anyone else have a question? Okay, then let me continue. What about the facts, the research, the studies that have been done on this topic? I'm going to give you some of the information. However, it might be helpful for you in the future to look up this information yourself. So the first would be Newsweek, April 2010. An article by Pat Wingert named "Priests Commit No More Abuse Than Other Males." Or in Psychology Today, an article by Tom Galante, PhD, the same year, 2010, wrote 6 myths about clergy sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Number 3, the U.S. government report by the Department of Health and a related study by the National Center for Victims of Crime, both published in 2014. And then facts and statistics that you can find from the Centers for Disease Control. And then finally, the John Jay College of Criminal Justice report done in 2002. This was a government report and should be read by anyone interested or concerned by these events because they particularly focused in on the church. What do these research and studies tell us? First, Catholic clergy are not more likely to abuse children than clergy from other denominations or by men in the general population. The best available data, the John Jay report and following studies after that, show that anywhere between 4 to 6% of Catholic priests in the United States have sexually victimized children, and this is over the past 50 years. That figure may be lower. However, the same statistics are probably true or maybe higher in school systems or in the general population. The second, sexual abuse in the church cannot be blamed on celibacy. Not having sex doesn't make children the object of one's desire. In fact, most abusers in society are married men or men with partners. And homosexuality is not the cause. There is no evidence that exists showing that one's sexual orientation makes them more at risk to commit a sex crime against children or anyone else. The fourth, an all-male clergy is not to blame. Women clergy have been known to abuse as well. And congregations that have both men and women clergy have not stopped the male clergy in those congregations from abusing. Fifth, most of the incidents reported occurred before the late 1980s. So we're talking well over 30 years ago. This is true in both the church, the school, the other organizations, but all knew it was happening. Sixth, most clergy offenders are not pedophiles. 80% of abusers abuse post-pubescent teens or other adults. Many books have tried to approach this topic. There's 2 that I read that I recommend. It's by that author, Thomas Pallanti, who wrote in Psychology magazine. One is called Sexual Abuse by Priests and the Role of the Catholic Church. And another is called Bless Me, Father, for I Have Sinned, Perspectives on Sexual Abuse by Roman Catholic Church Priests. Statistically, less than 1/3 of all abuse cases are reported. However, the National Child Abuse and Neglected Data Center reported a decline of 62% for sexual abuse and a 56% decline in physical abuse from 1992 to 2010. So once it was reported, once the church came out in the open and once things started changing and the procedures and policies, the rate has dropped dramatically. That also goes the same in schools, in scouting programs, and other organizations. Once it came out in the open, once people knew about it, procedures were put in place, it has drastically stopped that from happening. But still, there's a tremendous amount, and just in terms of the numbers, it's something like, I've lost the figure, but it's thousands of people. Oh, here it is. 62,900 cases of child abuse were reported in 2012. That's 69,000. And they say only 1/3 are reported. So can you imagine what the number was if the decline is 68%? And there was also 346,000 reported rapes or sexual assault of persons who are over the age of 12 years old. So that amount of incidents in the United States is unbelievable, unbelievable. And sometimes what's not included in there is the whole realm of the sex trade, where people enter into that and then stay into that and make that a profession of their life. So even though it's a decrease, it's still alarming at how prevalent in our society this is. And so the church needs to speak forcefully on this, particularly with the programs they have set up, as do the other organizations and institutions. Because only when everyone clearly knows what it is can we watch for it and see the signs. The bottom line regarding most of this is anger towards the church. Some who have left the church. Most of it has to do with the accusations regarding the cover-up, not the actual act. And I agree with so many others that it was phenomenal lack of wisdom and charity that was done by our bishops and others who were involved in this whole tragic chain of events. As a priest, along with parishioners and so many others, we were lied to by the church. In 2002, I personally wrote a letter to the United States Conference of Bishops and asked them to take 6 months off, all of them, in quiet prayer, and then come back asking forgiveness after they had realized what was happening and what they had been a part of. I never got a response. And I believe that the Religious Women's Conference wrote a similar request. I don't know what their response was. Now, regarding the Pennsylvania report that just came out recently, I read the whole thing. I had time to go through it all. I don't suggest reading it because it's horrible. They give a lot of descriptions of exactly what happened. And I specifically reread the section from Allentown, which is where our bishop, Bishop Barris, comes from. He inherited the problem from the previous bishop. He followed every procedure, legally, canonically, and spiritually. His actions were to prevent an abuser from being put out on his own unsupervised. The priest died a few months later. Bishop Barris did exactly what I would have done. And I know him to be an extremely honest and compassionate man. I trust him completely in these matters. And on top of that, if you read today's Newsday, okay, excellent. Finally, Cardinal Donato, who's in charge of the United States Bishops' Conference, and now today, Bishop Barris, have both publicly asked for a complete rendering of all the information and details from the Vatican. That's what I asked for in 2002. That's what many people have asked for. Because unless they do that, who's going to trust? You're going to trust God. You're going to trust the church as it is, because you're faithful people. But the people who run and manage it, you may not. And unless it's done, there's a cloud over every priest, deacon, religious bishop, unless it's clearly looked into. So I really commend Bishop Barris on that statement that came out today. It should also be noted that the Suffolk County Grand Jury Report in Suffolk, we called it the Spoda Report because Spoda was the DA, relied on interviews with dozens of priests, staff members, and others who lived or worked with the accused. This was not done in the Pennsylvania report. You can also go to the diocesan website, drvc.org. That's drvc.org. And you can read further on the questions, as well as read the section, which is the Office for the Prevention of Child Abuse, to get more information on this. So where do we go from here? Obviously, we need to listen, be open to healing and forgiveness, but only if one speaks the truth of their complicity in all of this. We also need to constantly upgrade our vigilance in the area of protection and education. As a people of God, we need to pray again and again and again for all involved, which, by the way, is all of us. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. May God bless each of you this day and every day. Any other questions? Any questions? Yes?
Well, there are a lot of masses being said and prayers for priests, Father, and other priests that are serving us feeling more pressure than some of the victims. And I think masses and prayers should be offered for that.
Thank you very much. And there are people who have offered masses for us. Some of us, when we have, like for instance, Bishop Seller and I, we can celebrate every day pretty much. So if whoever is not celebrating, whoever's not the main celebrant, the other person can do their own intention. And so when I do that, I pray for my brother priest and bishops. Yes, and others do that too, I'm sure.
Just what you're saying about the website, you see that this morning it was downloaded yesterday from an attorney that worked with Bishop Barris for 10 years pro bono to help him fight against sex abuse. Whether you agree with, Barris or not, it's just to let explain in detail how much he did do.
Right, it's on the website. Right, that's what I'm saying. Everything is on the website, so I would go to that. I'll put it to you this way, Linda, I'll put it to you this way. The question was asked about the donations that you give, do they go to pay the lawsuits? Okay, I forgot to mention something that I mentioned the other day. Insurance companies. There's a particular insurance company that insures 40,000 churches. And the rate that is charged the Catholic Church is not more than any of the other churches, which means the insurance companies have investigated this and realized that the church does not abuse more than other congregations. And believe me, insurance companies are not going to lose a cent. They're going to make sure. So that's number one. The other issue is that the church has forever been in the forefront of pretty much all major endeavors. The church was in the forefront of the university system in Europe. The church was in the forefront of orphanages, centers for the AIDS and cancer treatment. The church has been in the forefront with the street people, everyone. The church has always been in the forefront of that and always put their money to that. In this diocese, along with those entities, the work that is done in Catholic Charities, which is the biggest recipient of our Bishop's Appeal, our Catholic Ministers' Appeal funding, and many other organizations, it's the ministries that is being supported. Your donations support my salary, my room and board. Thank you very much, I appreciate that.
I think you're underpaid.
But, no, we get a lot of eternal benefits, okay? But the majority of the money is used for that. There is insurance that covers some of this, as well as a special fund that was set up. Bishop McGann, way back, had set up a fund for, as strange as it sounds, for the uninsured perils. One of them was trampolines. So if a school had a trampoline or like a gymnastic, that wasn't insured. So he set up a fund for that, and it was never hardly ever used. That fund built up over time, and some of that money is coming from that fund as well. And there are also some generous big donors who have donated money specifically for that. Yes, some money is being diverted from other agencies, from other things in the diocese to pay that. I have no idea how much or from where it comes from. We don't get those facts.
So Ed Brown asks, how are the faithful to understand religious who have been rewarded for hiding and orchestrating the cover-up of the clerical perpetrators in our own diocese?
Okay. Again, as I said very clearly, anyone who covered up, in my opinion, committed a crime and a sin. Anybody. No matter what they were doing it under, what auspices or what idea or what thought they had. Because it was always criminal. As an example, if someone came to me, and they have in the past, a mother comes to me with her 16-year-old daughter who's pregnant and wants me to get them to marry the guy that did it. I always called the police. Even though they didn't want it, I always did. Because it's a crime. It's statutory rape. I know that. So anytime a crime is committed, it's our duty to report it. Now, the people who covered up, they have to deal with that themselves. And again, why did they cover it up? How did they cover it up? I'm not, like I said, I was never involved in any single case. I was not interviewed by the DA. No one I ever lived with did anything. I'm happy about that. But I don't know. So I have no idea. Many of them are not rewarded. Okay? Many of them are no longer serving. Some of them have committed suicide. Some of them have turned to alcoholism. So it's not as rosy as a picture. They were rewarded for that. And now, particularly with Cardinal Donato and Bishop Barrett says, hopefully the other bishops will all get on board, because I am sure that more than one or two people knew about the stuff that was going on. Only by other people telling me that other people knew. I was on vacation recently, and someone who's not in the church, but who supports the church very well and financially very well, told me to expect a lot more, because he knows stuff. So if this is an outside person knowing stuff, I think the people in the church also know stuff. So.
One of our followers wanted to know if they were married by a priest that was accused of sexually assaulting someone, if their marriage is still valid.
Okay. A priest who celebrates any of the sacraments as the church intends, that sacrament is valid. So whether I killed somebody, whether I stole from the bank, whatever I did, if I celebrate the Eucharist, that is the body and blood of Christ. If I celebrate a wedding, it's the state that gives me the authority to make that a legal marriage in the state. And also, the couples themselves marry each other, and I'm a witness to that. So it's still a valid marriage, and so are baptism and everything else. As an example of that, the church protects and defends and supplies always to the people in the best it can. So in those cases, the church provides, even though the priest might be a bad priest. If I went into the bakery and said the Eucharistic prayers over all the buns and muffins in the bakery, it's not the Eucharist, because that's not what the church intends. The church even protects me from me by not allowing that to happen. So we're very fortunate that the church has created all those rules and guidelines.
That's all for now. I just asked if anybody else had any questions.
Okay, if anyone else had any questions and you want to send them in the future after you look at this and take some time, please do so. That's pretty much it. I got to run now to the hospital. Someone called me before. I got to go see someone who's not too well. Have a great day.